What if the person you're completely in love with turns out to not even be human? Sounds wild, right? I thought the same thing. Like, no way. That kind of stuff only happens in movies, right? Well, let me tell you, it happened to me. And trust me, it's a whole different world when you realize you've been living in a story you didn't even know existed. It all started when I left the orphanage 20 years ago, the place I'd called home for a decade. My mother had passed when I was just a child, leaving me in the hands of an institution that tried its best to give me a good living. I received the scholarship to a prestigious university in England. It felt like my life was finally taking a positive turn. The place was crawling with rich students, kids who could easily afford the luxuries that were far out of reach for me. But I didn't mind. I was just happy to be there. I met Scarlett, a rich girl, effortlessly beautiful with an air of mystery around her. She had this strange, knowing smile like she was hiding 1,000 secrets. She didn't look at me like I was some charity case, which, truthfully, I had worried about. I was just Kate, and to her that was enough. The university planned a trip into the mountains. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, including me. We were going mountain rappelling, something I'd never done before. The thrill made my heart race as I joined the group, ropes tied around my waist, the cold wind biting at my cheeks. But as I stepped over the edge, something went wrong. My foot slipped, and I plummeted into the dark abyss below. The fall seemed endless. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it would burst. Then, out of nowhere, strong hands caught me just before I hit the ground. My vision blurred, but I could make out a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing above me. I blinked, but before I could ask who he was, he disappeared into the night. During the trip, Scarlett introduced me to Will, a tall, handsome guy with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see into the depths of my soul. He had that kind of presence that made everyone turn when he walked into a room. His smile was warm, but his gaze? It held something ancient, something that made my heart race, though I couldn't quite figure out why. Will and I grew close, almost inseparable. We studied together, spent time in the library, and laughed at things that only the two of us seemed to find funny. Slowly, I found myself falling for him. The way his voice seemed to wrap around me like a soft, comforting breeze. Scarlett, who had always been kind, started to look at me with a different sort of worry in her eyes. She talked to me just like before, but her behavior made me feel that she is really worried about something. Then came that night, the party at Mr. Green's mansion. As I stood at the party, glancing around at the glittering lights and elegantly dressed guests, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mr. Green, Will's father, had gone pale the moment he saw me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. Fear, perhaps? He quickly composed himself, but the way his gaze lingered unsettled me. I tried to brush it off as I danced with Will, his hand warm in mine. But the questions kept bubbling up in my mind. Who was this family? And why did I feel like I was being watched all night? Later, back at my room, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. No matter how much I tried, sleep wouldn't come. The image of Mr. Green's weird expression flashed in my mind, over and over again. Why had he reacted that way? And why did I feel like I was at the center of something I couldn't yet understand? The next morning, I met up with Scarlett, my friend who had introduced me to Will. As we sat down for coffee in the campus cafe, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Scarlet, did something seem strange to you last night? Mr. Green?" He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. Scarlet froze for a moment, stirring her coffee a little too deliberately. "Kate, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "But you have to promise not to freak out." My heart skipped a beat, and I nodded, leaning in closer. "What is it?" She hesitated before speaking again. "Will isn't like other guys. Well, he's not entirely human." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though part of me felt like I already knew the answer. Scarlett sighed, looking around the cafe before whispering, "He's a vampire, Kate. Will was turned hundreds of years ago, and that's why his father reacted the way he did. Because you look exactly like someone from his past. This is some kind of joke, right? I mean, vampires?" But Scarlett's expression was dead serious. "Her name was Amy, and you look just like her. Will loved her, and she died tragically. One night, as Will was in the middle of transforming into a vampire, Amy appeared in front of him. She looked concerned, but something inside him had already started to change. He felt a powerful hunger he couldn't control. Even though he didn't want to hurt her, he couldn't stop himself. He got closer to Amy, and before he knew it, his instincts took over. He bit into her neck and began to drink her blood. Will never meant for it to happen, but in his confusion and hunger, he accidentally took too much. By the time he realized what he had done, it was too late. Amy had died in his arms. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. I felt cold, my skin prickling with unease. "So, what does that mean for me?" Scarlett bit her lip. "I don't know. But Kate, you need to be careful. Will might not mean to hurt you, but he's not exactly in control of himself sometimes." I left the cafe in a daze, my mind racing. I started avoiding Will after that, too scared to confront him but unsure of what I believed. Part of me was terrified, but another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, couldn't forget the way Will had made me feel. Safe. Loved. But was it real? Or was I just a replacement for Amy? Days passed, and Will grew more distant. His eyes filled with confusion and hurt every time I avoided him. And then, one night, everything changed. I was walking back to the dorm when suddenly, the world went dark. I woke up to find myself in a dimly lit cave, the scent of damp earth filling the air. My wrists were bound and panic surged through me. I tried to scream, but my throat felt tight and I realized I wasn't alone. "Kate?" A familiar voice murmured from the shadows. Will stepped forward, his eyes glowing faintly in the low light. He looked different, wilder, more dangerous than I'd ever seen him. His teeth were long and sharp, his skin was pale like a corpse, as if he wasn't alive, and when he touched me his hands were cold. He wasn't the same Will I met earlier. The only similar thing left was his eyes filled with sadness. "I had to bring you here," he said softly. "I couldn't let you keep running from me." I shivered with fear. I just wanted to run away, as if he is going to punish me for what I did to him. But with all my strength I asked, "Will, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?" He knelt beside me, his face softening. "I've tried to stay away, but I can't. You're the only thing keeping me tethered to what's left of my humanity. I thought I could resist, but you look so much like her. Like Amy." He continued, I met you before Scarlet introduced me to you, during the trip when your foot slipped, and you were falling. My past was in front of me, falling into the dark. I said to myself, no, I won't let her die this time. So I saved you that night. Later, I realized that I took Amy's life 300 years back and you are someone with Amy's face. I felt a pang of jealousy and fear at the mention of her name. I'm not Amy, Will, I'm Kate, and this isn't right. He ran his hands through my untidy hair and said, but you know, Kate, when I came close to you, I realized I was already in love with you and can't stay away from you anymore. Please don't leave me. His eyes filled with tears. Before I could think of anything, a howl echoed through the cave, and my blood ran cold. Will's head snapped up, his expression hardening. They're coming. I heard them then. The low growls, the sound of paws scraping against the rocky floor. Wolves, larger than any I'd ever seen, appeared at the cave's entrance. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, and I realized they weren't ordinary wolves. These were creatures of the night, just like Will. One of the wolves lunged at me, and I screamed, but before it could reach me, Will was there. He moved faster than I could see, his strength inhuman as he threw the wolf back. The other wolves circled, growling, but Will stood his ground. Stay behind me, he commanded, and I could do nothing but obey. Will fought them off, and when the last of the wolves finally fled, I was left trembling, tears streaming down my face. I sat there, shaking, trying to comprehend what had just happened. And then, slowly, I stood, facing him. I gathered all the courage and asked, "What are you?" Will sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm what Scarlet told you. I wasn't always this way, but now I am. I didn't want you to find out like this." "Why me?" I whispered. "Why now?" He looked at me, his blue eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Because you remind me of her, Kate, of Amy. But you're not her. You are you." And suddenly, it all clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle I had been missing. I wasn't just someone from his past. I was someone he cared about now, in this moment. Despite everything, despite the centuries that had passed, he saw me. He turned to me, his chest heaving, eyes wild. "Now, do you see, Kate? This is why I've kept my distance. I'm dangerous. But I can't let you go. I can't lose you like I lost Amy." My fear softened, replaced by a strange tenderness. "Then tell me the truth, Will. Tell me everything." And he did. He told me about the night he was turned, about the centuries he had spent wandering the world, and about Amy, the girl he had loved and lost. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke, and I saw the weight he carried. He was trapped in an endless nightmare, and somehow I had become a part of it. When he finished, I reached for his hand, my heart full of a strange resolve. "We'll find a way, Will. We'll find a way to break this curse." He looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in years. "Are you sure, Kate? This life? It's dangerous." "I don't care," I whispered. "I care about you." Together, we decided to journey to the vampire world, where the supreme leader of the vampires could reverse his curse. The journey was long, filled with dark forests and eerie silence. When we finally met the leader, he was a towering figure with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. But, somehow, our love, the humanity we shared, moved him. He spared Will, turning him back into the human he once was. As we returned to the world we knew, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Will was free. In the end, we lived quietly, away from the noise and danger, our hearts forever entwined just like a fairy tale, soft and soothing in the night. I'll never forget the day Joe and I first heard about the magical pencil. It was one of those lazy afternoons when the air felt drowsy and the world seemed to slow down. Joe leaned in and said, "Chris, have you heard about the pencil?" Now, Joe was the kind of friend who always had some wild idea or another, but this time, something in his eyes made me listen closely. "What about it?" I asked, pretending not to be too interested. But inside, my curiosity was bubbling over. "It can make anything you draw come to life," Joe said, leaning in even closer, his face serious. "And it's hidden up in the mountains, guarded by some kind of monster." I couldn't help but laugh a little. "A monster? Come on, Joe, that sounds like one of your made-up stories." But Joe wasn't laughing. "I'm serious. They say no one who's gone after the pencil has ever come back." Now, that got my attention. I had heard whispers about a hidden island, far away beyond the hills, where the trees spoke and the stars above shone a little brighter than anywhere else. I couldn't shake the idea, so I decided to go. It felt like the island was calling me, in a way that was gentle yet irresistible, like an old friend waving from a distance. The idea of a pencil that could turn drawings into reality. That was enough to make me stop laughing. And the thought of an adventure? Even better. So, without thinking too much, we headed towards the island. The sky deepened into a velvety blue, and soon we reached the foot of the hills. They weren't towering or intimidating, just soft, rolling mounds that seemed to go on forever. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a cozy blanket, making everything else seem far, far away. I started to climb, and with each step, the world below seemed to fade until it was just me and the sound of my own breath, steady and calm. At the top, we found something we hadn't expected. A boat. It was small, with smooth wooden sides that seemed to glow in the soft light of the stars. There was no one else around, no sign of who had left it there, but we didn't question it. The boat felt like it had been waiting for us, patiently, for a long time. We climbed into the boat, its wooden surface cool beneath our hands. As soon as we sat down, the boat began to move, gliding silently over the still waters. The island lay ahead, its silhouette dark against the starry sky. The sound of the boat slicing through the water was the only thing we could hear. Even the gentle breeze seemed to quiet itself, as if it too was waiting for what would come next. I glanced over at Joe, and he gave me a small, reassuring nod. We didn't need to speak. We both knew this was something bigger than us. As we drew closer, the island came into clearer view. Tall trees lined the shore, their branches swaying slightly, like they were whispering secrets to one another. There was a strange glow emanating from deeper within, a soft light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The boat bumped gently against the shore, and we stepped out onto the sand. It was surprisingly warm beneath my feet, as if the island itself was alive, breathing beneath the surface. "Do you think it's here?" Joe whispered, his voice barely louder than the breeze. I nodded, my eyes drawn to the glowing light in the distance. "I think it's waiting for us," I replied, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. We made our way through the trees, the air growing warmer and heavier with each step. The light ahead grew brighter, casting long shadows that danced around us. And then we saw it, a small clearing bathed in the same soft glow we had seen from the shore. In the center of the clearing sat a large stone pedestal, and atop it, the pencil. It was small, almost unassuming, but there was something about it that made the air around us feel electric. I took a step forward, my heart racing. "Is this it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Joe nodded, his eyes wide. "This is it," he said softly. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cool surface of the pencil. The moment I touched it, I felt a surge of energy run through me, like the world around us had suddenly shifted. The island seemed to hum, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the trees and into the sky. The stars above us brightened, and for a moment everything felt connected. The island, the pencil, and us. "Draw something," Joe said, his voice filled with wonder. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly brought the pencil to the ground. With a deep breath, I began to draw the first thing that came to mind. A bird, soaring gracefully through the sky. Back at my house, we could hardly contain our excitement. Joe held the pencil in his hands, staring at it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "All right," Joe said, grabbing a piece of paper. "Let's see if this thing really works." He sketched a simple chocolate bar, nothing fancy. And then, right before our eyes, the chocolate popped into existence. The smell hit us first. Rich, sweet, and impossible to resist. We looked at each other, eyes wide. "Whoa," Joe whispered. "It actually worked." I grabbed the chocolate, taking a bite just to be sure. The taste was unreal, better than anything I'd ever had. We both started laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from pure disbelief. "Chris, we've got to try something else," Joe said, voice full of excitement. "We could make anything now." Anything. The word echoed in my mind, full of possibilities. From that moment on, the pencil became my constant companion. I kept it tucked safely in my pocket, always within reach. Over the next few days, we tested the pencil again and again. We drew small things at first, cookies, coins, even a little toy car. And each time, whatever we drew came to life, real as anything. One afternoon, Joe grinned at me, holding the pencil. "What if we drew something bigger? Like a house?" I looked at him, half joking. "You think a whole house could just pop out of nowhere?" But then again, after everything we'd seen, who knew what was possible? With a playful shrug, I said, "All right, let's give it a shot." Joe sketched a little cabin with a chimney and a garden out front. We watched as the lines he drew shimmered for a moment before becoming solid. The cabin appeared, fully formed, right there in my backyard. Smoke even puffed gently from the chimney, and the garden was full of bright, colorful flowers. We stared at it, speechless for a moment. Then Joe burst out laughing. "We just made a house! We made a house! I couldn't help but laugh too. This was insane, beyond anything we could have imagined. But something about having that kind of power made me think. Sure, we were having fun, but what else could we do with it? What if the pencil could change bigger things, like the world itself? That night, as I lay in bed, I turned the pencil over in my hands, thinking about everything we had drawn so far. The chocolate bar, the toy car, the cabin, and yet, it still felt like we were only scratching the surface. The next day started like any other, with the sun just peeking through the curtains, painting the room in soft golden light. But something felt different, like the whole world had shifted slightly, knowing I held something as powerful as the magical pencil. I could still feel its weight in my pocket, as if it was calling out to me. Joe showed up at my door early, a wild glint in his eyes. "Morning, Chris. Ready for the next big thing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Big thing?" He smirked. "Come on. You're not seriously thinking we're going to just draw coins and chocolate all day, are you?" I sighed, a smile playing on my lips despite myself. Joe always had a way of turning the ordinary into something more alive, more exciting. "All right. What do you have in mind?" Joe tapped his chin thoughtfully, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What if we, I don't know, drew something like a map, but not just any map. A map that leads us to somewhere magical, somewhere no one's ever been." Now, that caught my attention. I could already feel the tingling sensation of anticipation. My fingers brushed over the pencil, and before I knew it, I was sketching, each line flowing easily, as if the pencil knew what it wanted to create. A map began to take shape, the mountains curving like rolling waves, valleys dipping into mysterious shadows. There were winding rivers, strange symbols etched along the edges, and, at the very center, an X marked in a bold stroke. Joe leaned in, his breath barely a whisper. "Looks like we've got ourselves a destination." With the map in hand, we set out into the soft light of the morning, the breeze cool and sweet, the world waking up with the quiet chirping of birds. The path led us through familiar woods at first, the kind where sunlight dappled through the trees, and everything smelled fresh, like rain on leaves. But soon, the trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, and the light more elusive. "This isn't normal, right?" Joe said, his voice soft, almost like he didn't want to disturb the quiet stillness around us. Even the air felt different, thicker, like stepping into a dream you weren't quite sure how to wake from. I shook my head, feeling that familiar twinge of excitement mixed with the unknown. We've definitely never been here before. The map led us deeper, guiding us with an odd certainty, until we reached a clearing that felt strange. The grass was softer than anything I'd ever felt, like walking on clouds, and the air buzzed with a gentle hum, like the trees themselves were whispering secrets to one another. In the middle of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its bark twisting into spirals, the roots curling up from the ground like the fingers of a giant. At the base of the tree there was a door, a tiny wooden door barely large enough for someone to crawl through. Joe knelt down, peering at the door with wide eyes. "Think it leads somewhere?" I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out soft, almost a whisper. "Only one way to find out." With a careful hand, I opened the door, and inside was nothing but darkness, the kind that pulled you in, wrapping around your senses like a blanket. but there was something warm about it, something inviting, like it was waiting for us to step through. Joe glanced at me, his grin a little more uncertain now, but still full of that adventurous spark. After you. I crawled inside, the cool earth beneath my hands, and as soon as both of us were through, the door shut behind us with a soft click. The darkness wasn't complete for long. Tiny, shimmering lights began to appear, like stars scattered across the night sky. We weren't underground anymore. We were floating in a vast, endless sky. But instead of clouds, there were islands, each one drifting lazily in the soft breeze. Bridges of glowing vines connected them, swaying gently. And on the islands, strange creatures roamed, giant birds with wings that shimmered like rainbows, deer with antlers made of crystal. "It's like a dream," Joe whispered, his voice filled with awe. I nodded, my heart swelling with wonder. It was more than a dream. It was magic, the kind that wraps you up and makes you forget the world you came from. "Where do you think the map wants us to go?" I asked, my voice barely louder than the wind. Joe held up the map, his eyes tracing the lines. "There." He pointed to a distant island. One that seemed to glow a little brighter than the rest, a soft, golden light spilling from its edges. "I think that's where the X is." We walked across the glowing bridges, our steps light and soft, the air full of the sound of distant wind chimes, as if the sky itself was singing to us. When we reached the island, we found something unexpected. A small, silver chest nestled in the grass, almost hidden under the soft blades. I bent down, the pencil warm in my pocket, and opened the chest slowly. Inside, instead of treasure, was a book. A small, leather-bound book with blank pages. Joe frowned. "A book?" But as I touched it, I felt a strange pull, like the book was alive too, waiting for something. I reached for the pencil and gently touched it to the first page. Instantly, the book began to fill with words, not written by me, but as if the pencil was guiding my hand. "This is your story," the words said, soft and glowing on the page. "Whatever you draw, whatever you imagine, will become part of this world." Joe and I exchanged glances, both of us knowing in that quiet moment that our adventure had only just begun. The world around us hummed with possibilities, the soft sounds of magic in the air, lulling us into a calm, peaceful feeling. It wasn't just about what we could draw or where we could go. It was about discovering what this magic truly meant. And just like that, we returned to our lives. From the outside, nothing had changed. We were still Chris and Joe, two ordinary teens in an ordinary town. But we knew better. We had a secret that could change everything if we let it. But we never did. The pencil's power, the adventures it promised. And that's how it stayed.